We're back again with Day 1, Episode 4 of Last of Us Season 2, with Dina and Ellie in Seattle, exploring the remote areas of the QZ, or the Abandoned Quarantine Zone, and they find themselves in the middle of a cycle of violence between the WLF and the Seraphites. And as I said in my last episodic review, they have no idea what they're about to step into, and they find out pretty quick. Not going to be able to cover everything, but I will cover most details of this episode, and I'll try not to spoil what happens later on down the line. So if you don't want to know what happens, there's your warning. This episode does something that I was really missing from the last season, to have more flashbacks filling in some gaps with how the world adapted to the outbreak of the fungus. In the case of this, we see Fedra and the WLF clashing against each other. As it's alluded to in the opening credits of the first game, the United States government became a police state, taking away all the basic freedoms and rights of the American citizens. Fedra, which is the last remaining authority in the United States at least, took things too far, which led to various rebellions in the QZs, with Boston being one of the only ones left. We get a flashback to 2018 where we meet Isaac, played by Jeffrey Wright, who plays the same character in the game, Part 2, who was a sergeant in Fedra, who feels disenfranchised and turned off by Fedra's extreme methods. But then Isaac stops to talk to the members of the WLF, but not before taking out that recruit who asked that simple question, killing everybody else in the truck. And he gives his soldier the choice. Does he go along with what he's doing or not? Fast forward to the present day where Isaac's the leader of the WLF. Something that I really love about Last of Us Part 2, there's a lot of things to love, for me anyway, about Part 2. There's so much world building that we get to see and how the rest of the world dealt with the outbreak. In the games, when you go to certain areas, you can pick up letters to read, and it tells a story about what happened in a certain place and time, but it's all from the vantage points of Joel, Ellie, and Abby. With live action and television, we have more freedom to explore those areas. And it's very similar to what we saw in the last season with KC and the rebel group that took over the QZ. Craig Mazin said in one of the Inside the Episodes that when there's a dramatic shift in power, history is full of examples where the revolutionary force is just as bad as what was there before, and the WLF is no different. Isaac had some noble intentions because he saw how far Fedra was taking certain things with their methods against these citizens in the QZ, but now he's their leader, torturing a Scar for information about what's going on with his group. In fact, you could say that he's much worse than some tyrannical Fedra general. Somehow it went over my head that Jeffrey Wright was Isaac in the game. I had literally no clue. I mean, I had seen him before in movies like The Hunger Games, and I knew that at the time when the game was coming out, he was going to be Jim Gordon in The Batman with Robert Pattinson. He did the voice and the motion capture work for the character, and just like Merle Dandridge, who was Marlene in both the game and the show, Jeffrey Wright manages to age into the character of Isaac at this point. I think he's about 60 years old or 59, if I'm not mistaken, and Wright, I think, is one of the best character actors in the industry right now. I think if you were to just take him at face value, he would come off as very unassuming, but he has a quiet intensity to him. If you push him the wrong way, watch your back. And how he just burns this Scar's hand with a cooking pot while telling a story about how he used to charm women back in the day before the outbreak. He would go to Williams-Sonoma, and it was one of the things that he knew that he was good at in his dating life. The fact that he's so casual and so ruthless all at once, I mean... We saw glimpses of how intense Isaac was in the game. This show goes full force. And I find the back and forth between him and that Scar fascinating, or the Seraphite. The cycle of violence just never ends. You broke the treaty because we broke the treaty. You broke the treaty because we broke the treaty, and so on and so forth. Neil Druckmann has said publicly that this is based on the never-ending cycle of violence, or the never-ending conflict between Israel and Palestine. If you were to watch how this plays out with those influences in mind, the WLF is basically the Israeli Defense Force. The Seraphites are the Palestinian freedom fighters, or whoever else takes their place, like Hezbollah or in recent years with Hamas. And given that Neil Druckmann is from Tel Aviv originally and at one point in his youth lived in occupied West Bank, no shot coming from me, artists will write what they know. Even if some people find that to be obnoxious political commentary, depending on how you vote, yeah, I could see how you'd be turned off by that. But other pieces of entertainment like movies or television or even a couple of video games, like The Last of Us, have made comparisons and allegories like this. So Last of Us is not the exception to the rule. But then in a very chilling moment, once he kills that Scar, we see a young WLF soldier being shaken by what Isaac's doing, and then we see that same recruit, or that soldier that he recruited all that time ago, basically a shell of what he used to be, saying Scar got what he deserved. Isaac, along with most of the WLF, are blinded by tribalism, us against them. Another thing that we see in our real world many times, and you don't have to read too far into a history book to figure that out. Really hope that we get more flashbacks like this, especially with the Scars and how they rose to power, because that's another thing they also talk about, that there are some disagreements within the cult of the Seraphites. Some view her as just a prophet, while others worship her as a deity. And the prisoner writes them off as heathens or something. I can't remember exactly what he said. But that's another thing that's common in other religions too. Some are more secular than others and vice versa. And while some are kind of in the middle, so to speak. As for Ellie and Dina, they make their way through Seattle in the abandoned QZ. Most of the areas that they go into are abandoned. They find rainbow flags that are hanging from light poles on the streets, which I believe is the site of the Stonewall riots in the 1960s. And Seattle and the West Coast in particular are very, very friendly and affirming to the gay community in the United States. And there's other cities across the country like New York, Philly, and Boston, and so on. But the West Coast in particular was a really big safe haven for the gay community back in the day. They also had some of that in the original game where you're riding on horseback and Ellie and Dina are noticing all these things. And what I really like is that Ellie and Dina in this situation say, maybe they were all optimists. That's why they had so many rainbows. Now in this situation, when the world ended in 2003, gay marriage and gay rights weren't fully accepted like they were by the time 2013 came in, which is when the original game took place in the opening mission. And in hindsight, it's not too surprising, I guess, that Seth would make that ignorant slur towards Ellie and Dina. The Bush administration wasn't exactly too kind to gay rights and gay marriage, which doesn't really sit well with me personally, but that's neither here nor there. Not gonna get on my soapbox, I promise. They find an abandoned tank, dead Fedra soldiers, thinking that maybe there was some sort of civil war between Fedra. Not entirely wrong, given what we know about Isaac deserting Fedra to help the WLF. But then they go into a music store nearby, and we get this beautiful, angelic moment. And it's really easy to miss when you're going through this certain area of Seattle once you enter the QZ. Ellie finds his guitar in this guitar case and starts playing a-ha's Take On Me. Dina's response here is so... I don't know if I'm going to be able to put this into words, just how emotionally... Oh god, I'm losing it already. It was a touching moment in the game once you found it, but here I think it's done a lot better because it helps Dina fall more in love with Ellie. At this point, they haven't fully connected with each other romantically. They're slowly still building towards that relationship. In the game, they already had that relationship, and it helps Dina appreciate and love Ellie even more. Not that it's bad in the game, I just think in this situation it was done a little better. Some might disagree with me, and that's perfectly fine, but it also goes back to the guitar lessons that Joel promised to give Ellie in Season 1. Now, I'm not an expert or singing on music, but Bella's performance of this song is just angelic, and the pitches that they hit with certain notes, again, I'm gonna lose it. Not only that, but we see a cover of a Pearl Jam album, Binaural, which has some really good songs in there like Grievance and Light Years. Sidebar here, the song Light Years in particular, Eddie Vedder wrote that for a friend of his that passed away unexpectedly. And that song also hits deep with me because I said before that I lost a good friend of mine unexpectedly too a couple years back. And I think this song in the case of The Last of Us fits just nicely because as Eddie once said in a concert,
and if you got good friends, love them while they're here.
And for the last 5 years since I played Part 2, hearing that song Take On Me, I can't listen to that song the same way anymore. And a thing to note about it, which is so gorgeous, is that it was played in episode 7 of season 1, where we see a flashback to Ellie and Riley, Ellie's first love. It's her only connection to Joel and Riley, and now her new love, Dina. So they hide out in the music store till nighttime to navigate through the streets. And just like in the game, they see a very disturbing and unpleasant sight. Bodies hanging from the ceiling and studio lights, literally, I apologize if this is too graphic, disemboweled. Yeah, just saying that literally made me want to vomit, so I'm just going to keep it at that. And Dina does exactly that, vomiting at the sight of what she's seeing. Ellie also discovers the sign on the wall, which is the same thing that they saw from the group of Seraphites in the woods outside the city, realizing that that group did this to the wolves.
That group we saw in the woods, they did this. What the f*** is wrong with Seattle?
A good question that you don't want to know the answer to. Then this squad of wolves come in to investigate. Then we get somewhat of a stealth mission callback where Ellie tries to sneak up on this one WLF soldier. He spots her, she gets him in a headlock, then Dina comes to her rescue, giving away their position, and they take off into the street in the rain. As Ellie was sneaking up behind that soldier, my arms started to go up like this. Muscle memory flashback kicked right in. And they end up in an abandoned metro subway station. The soldiers throw a bunch of flares around to look for Dina and Ellie, but they don't even notice a group of tendrils on the ground underneath a subway car. As soon as I saw those two things moving around, I thought, oh no. I mean, something similar does happen in the game, yes, but they're already hiding, and the tendrils aren't a thing in the games like I've said before. But in the case of that game, you as Ellie can throw a bottle or a brick to an open area, getting the clicker's attention so that way they can jump on the enemy nearby, then they get all distracted so you could sneak away. But since the tendrils are a source of communication for the infected, they're in for a shit show. Excuse me. So as they hear the sounds coming from not too far away, Dina closes her eyes and starts counting how many sounds she hears, which is a good callback to the listening mode where you can use it to hear enemies in a nearby location. This whole set of shots from cutting back to the WLF, to Ellie, and then Dina counting on her hands how many sounds she's hearing, by the time she gets to 5, yeah, there's no point in counting. It's a horde. I said out loud as soon as she hit 5. 5 plus change. And the Horde comes in to kill all the WLF soldiers there, and Ellie and Dina try to escape through the subway cars. This would be a good haunted house attraction for Universal Studios, and even what we have up here in Pennsylvania called Field of Screams. If they were to make something like this for that location, that's probably the only reason why I would go. So as they escape, the infected catch on to what they're doing, and they get caught in the swirling door. Dina's about to get bit, but Ellie instinctively puts her arm in front of Dina's face to take the bite. But she doesn't realize until they get to that abandoned theater that Dina's ready to pull the trigger. Dina is dead set, but Ellie has to do a lot of talking to calm her down and have her come to her senses. Big change in the game, because at one point Ellie gets jumped on by an infected that breaks her mask. Dina offers to take off her mask so they could share it by holding their breath. It happens pretty quickly, but Dina is able to quickly catch on. But then she wakes up with water dropping on her face, and for a second it almost made me think, oh my gosh, she's turning! Oh no, it's just water. And then Dina realizes Ellie's gonna be okay, and reveals that she's pregnant. And then the relationship is solidified. I mentioned some of the changes before, but I do like how this plays out. In fact, dare I say it, I actually kind of like it better here. I've heard some people argue that this feels just like a road trip that they're taking to Seattle and that Ellie's not really broken up over Joel. I understand those criticisms, but where I differ on that is that I've experienced grief myself. Not everybody feels sad and depressed all the time when you experience a loss of some kind. There are moments throughout grief where human beings experience a moment of joy and an escape from what they're feeling. Now in the game, Ellie's a lot more stoic and a lot more serious and blinded by her own desire for revenge against Abby. If you prefer that way over this one, I think that's perfectly valid. But here, I think it humanizes Ellie a lot more, and it's able to help them solidify the connection that they have with each other, and how Dina felt like she couldn't be attracted to girls when her mom said, no, you like boys. Again, coming from the world that was not so accepting of gay people before the outbreak, I think it's perfectly understandable. And with all the darkness and craziness that goes on in this world, it doesn't hurt, I think, to have at least some moment of joy between two people. Real life is not all sunshine and rainbows, but it's not all dark clouds and overcasts and storms either. And human beings are complicated, as I've said before in other videos. We're fickle, we have bad impulses, but we're also capable of great things and great joy. I've also heard some people say that this line where Ellie says, I'm gonna be a dad, was so obnoxious and too woke. A bunch of MAGA talking heads in the online world have gone on about how they don't see how it fits with the traditional gender roles that they believe in and so on and so forth. I'm not gonna get into any of that here, except for how does that affect you? It doesn't. If that bothers you because it doesn't fit your narrow worldview, that's a you problem and you need to get over yourselves. That's all I'll say. What I think that maybe was kind of missing, I'll admit, that Ellie was feeling a sense of urgency about Dina because she was going to need medical attention and she was clearly overtired from the pregnancy and she didn't know for sure what was going on. Now Ellie is feeling conflicted about whether or not they should continue on their revenge mission or they should go back to Jackson because Dina's going to need some help from a doctor. And here I don't think it's really as apparent. It's probably a little earlier on in the pregnancy, besides the puking at certain sites that they see in Seattle. Now for any women who happen to be watching this, I apologize if I'm sounding insensitive or whatever. I'm not an expert on pregnancy, so don't crucify me, please, for getting details wrong. But with Dina, as I've said before, having been there when Joel died, giving her more of a reason to want to go on this revenge mission, I'm fine with the change here. I mean, we'll see how the rest of the season plays out with it. It also does kind of give Ellie a break, I would say, on whether or not Dina's going to be okay by the time she gets back to their hideout, which plays really big into the final moment when they see all this violence happening X amount of miles away. Even though Ellie is worried, she knows that she can't stop Dina, so she's got no other choice but to go ahead anyway with her. So that's episode 4. We got 3 more to go. I really don't want to have 3 more. I want to have at least 5 more. Being a little selfish, I know. But so far, I think season 2 has been really great. We'll see how the rest of it plays out, but I think it might be a little too short for my liking. But that's all I have to say about episode 4, day 1. Thank you guys so much for watching. Comment below and tell me what your thoughts are on this episode. As always, see you guys in the next one, and endure and survive.